Hello, everyone, and welcome to LDM Radio Sports Talk, the show that talks about sports and other topics relatable to sports fans. Joining me again this week in Pennsylvania is Scott Blander.
Greetings. How are you? Happy second half of baseball season, NHL free agency, football about to start. Good times, except for the heat. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to agree. I mean, I think this time of year is kind of like the slow season. You really only have baseball, and then for everybody else who just likes the winter sports, they're kind of just waiting for summer to go by so that they can get their sports back if they don't like baseball. I think for me, I love the fact that all sports have news pretty much all year round. Like we're about to get into the hockey. We have the free agency market that opened up. Basketball always has some drama with some star that doesn't want to be there anymore, and and we've had drafts going through all over. We actually had since our last show, we had the NHL draft, and we had the NBA. There was an NBA draft, and then the MLB draft. So there's always something going on. That's why I love sports. And when people ask me what else I watch, I really don't watch anything else because there's so much sports going on with a little bit of free time that I have going on. So we'll actually go into the NHL now. So there was a really, really busy flurry of deals that happened. Of course, every time free agency opens up, and the NHL has their super hard cap, salary cap, which makes it very, very difficult for teams to operate. And now we have a situation where you have players that you really like, but you can't afford to keep them. They kind of price themselves out of the teams, and they go to different teams. It's not always. I don't think it's always uh, a messy situation. I think sometimes it's just a mutual. I need more money for what I'm doing, and I have to go get it. And people have to think about their families more than uh, the teams themselves. Unfortunately, it's kind of the ugly side of sports. But let's go into what is going. So I think maybe the top story, and there's a lot of teams that have improved, and some teams that have taken a step back because of the losses and transitions between the trades and the free agency. So the Calgary Flames, unfortunately, have been through. They've had probably the worst summer of all NHL teams right now. They had Johnny Gaudreau, who had and it's a perennial all-star. I'd say definitely one of the top tier forwards in the NHL. He ends up declining an over $10 million a year offer from Calgary to take a lesser deal with the Columbus Blue Jackets, which totally just like shocked the whole NHL world. Tell me what you thought about that when it happened, and what do you think is going on in Calgary?
Not good things going on in Calgary because now they're getting hit with the Matthew Tkachuk situation. But I mean, you can't blame the guy. Players get drafted. They're going to play out the contract. They're loyal. They give it their all. And then it's a business. It's a business for the teams. It's just as much of a business for the players. I saw an article. I forgot where I saw it, but one of the hockey sites where it said something. The name of the article was, "Is it wrong for players to not re-sign with the team that drafted them?" I'm thinking that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. These guys, they can go wherever they want. Again, they're not. You can assume you don't see in hockey guys doing like the LeBron James thing where I'm going to sign a 2-year, 3-year deal and then just keep taking having a team built around me then take off. These guys aren't going to do that. He's going to Columbus for 7 years, so he's not going anywhere. You can't fault the guy. He gave it his all in Calgary. He was a fan favorite there, but he didn't want to spend the next portion of his career there. Yeah, I think the money would have been wherever he went. The money was going to be there. He, for whatever reason, family, for who knows what his actual, tipping point was to get him to Columbus, but for whatever reason, that was the perfect fit for him. So, it sucks for the Calgary fans. And, that team has gone from Stanley Cup contender to a possible playoff team next year, unless they, do some kind of trades to replace the two one, maybe two massive guns that they're losing this offseason, but you can't blame the guy. At least he didn't keep them dangling on the line like John Tavares did when he left the Islanders. Now, again, it happened to the Islanders, which makes it hilarious. But all trading deadline, he was, dealing with Lou Lamoriello saying, don't trade me. I'm going to resign. I'm going to resign. No, he didn't trade him. They could have gotten a pair of first round picks and two prospects for him. And then, in the 11th hour, he walks and goes to Toronto, which I'm sure he was probably planning the entire time. Awful move again because it's the Islanders. It's hilarious. Not a good way to go out. I don't, Gaudreau's wasn't exactly like that. We don't, he never came out and said, yes, I'm going to resign here. Don't trade me. It was their hopes and dreams that they could strike a deal. They didn't. He left. It stinks for Calgary, but, to each his own. Good luck to him in Columbus.
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely a different situation from the Jonathan Tavares situation when he ended up, like you said, saying that he's going to stay there, and then they don't trade him, and then he ends up leaving the team anyway. So the Calgary fan base is hurt, but they can't be as hurt as the New York Islander fans were, and some of them still are to this day. Um, when you look at the situation as a whole, that definitely I agree with you as re-signing with go sign wherever you want to go sign with. Basically when the drafts happen, it's the talent and it's the people that end up giving you your opportunity. But if you don't want to stay there, you don't want to stay there. Now, what Calgary, what their issue was that they were a Stanley Cup contender and they were very much in like primed for a deep playoff run. So that they were the top team in the standings for a little bit there and during the season before the Avalanche came over. I mean, basically one of the top four teams in the league basically the whole season wire to wire last year, and then they end up getting clipped in the playoffs. But it was a bad situation where you can't trade one of your top stars when you're going for the Stanley Cup.
Right.
Yeah, that was basically a really really tough situation for the Calgary Flames, even if they had a hint of this happening. And they clearly exhausted every opportunity they had to keep him, and he just decided that he didn't want to stay there. And it was it's it's a tough situation for the Calgary Flames and their fans, but it was a decision that Johnny Gaudreau had to make, and he ended up making the best of the situation. Now, so fast forwarding a little bit into what happened there, he ends up going on a very very short free agency run for the couple hours that he was there. So the New Jersey Devils threw money at him, the New York Islanders threw money at him, and apparently it was reported that he wanted to go to the Philadelphia Flyers, which makes a lot of sense because they have Kevin Hayes there and Cam Atkinson, who were all BC guys, Boston College guys. And he ends up, obviously they didn't have enough money to snag him, or he definitely would have went there. So he ends up going in a close proximity to Columbus. And the Columbus Blue Jackets, for those that don't know at home, that not your traditional hockey town, not a place where a lot of free agents like to go. There's a lot of situations where players that get drafted there, and they've had a couple of good stars there throughout the years. They always end up leaving, and he actually goes in and he takes the challenge of being one person going into a team to be an impact player and to hopefully build around him. And I think I have the utmost respect for that because a lot of players, in a lot of sports, especially basketball, but in a lot of sports that players don't want to go into situations unless they're already made winning situations and they have potential to be great. But this is a situation where the Columbus Blue Jackets have been through transition because a couple of years ago they ended up trading a lot of their first round picks in order to uh, win their first ever playoff series, which was against the President's Trophy winning Tampa Bay Lightning at that time. And they ended up successfully doing that. And then they were ousted in the second round, but they really went for it at that point. So they've had a bit of a dearth of talent going through to our present day today. And Johnny Gaudreau wants to be an answer. He stood up there. He's like, I'm coming to this team, and we're gonna, start building towards a winner. And I think that was I think it's fantastic for the city of Columbus. especially one that's not a big hockey town. They have something really, which it was a surprise to everybody. It had to be a surprise to them as well. And basically they just won the Johnny Gaudreau lottery, so everybody's happy over there. And I think it's going to be great moving forward and seeing how that team develops now that they have this star on the roster.
Yeah, the Columbus thing came out of absolutely nowhere because we were hearing the rumors. Philly, the Islanders, the Devils. I thought it was pretty much down to those three, and I'm just sitting there thinking, like, which one of these is the least of the worst case scenario for him to go to? And I'm sure we both have Flyer fan friends. They're furious right now because he made it public he wanted to go there. Not only do you have the BC connection, but he's from South Jersey, right outside Philly. Like southern part of New Jersey is Philly country, and it doesn't. You get about the central part where it becomes, New York territory. But all that, he grew up a Flyers fan. He wanted to go there. He made it public he wanted to go there, and it was on Philly GM to maneuver some things around to make the cap space, and they never did it. Which eliminated the possibility he couldn't possibly sign there, even though he wanted to. And Flyer fans are not happy about that. That's terrible management. I like that does not come along very often, and that is the kind of guy you want to rebuild your franchise around. Hence what he's doing in Columbus, and then you've got the Devils sitting there offering him 10.2, the biggest contract, and he goes to Columbus out of absolutely nowhere for $500,000 a year less, which is probably more hilarious than the Tavares situation with the Islanders. So, as Ranger fans here, we dodged a major bullet there. None of the teams, the Devils might have gotten a tad better. They went from terrible goaltending to average goaltending, but beyond that, that Jack Hughes and Johnny Gaudreau combination would have been just absolutely terrifying. And fortunately, we don't get to see it, so it's going to be interesting. I've been to Columbus. I've been to a Ranger game out there. Just a great city, great fan base. Very good hockey town. It really is. And it'll be very interesting to see what they put around him. They've got 70. Realistically speaking, they've got 3 to 4. To turn that thing into a winner, and it'll be very interesting to see what they do.
Yeah, it's a superstar going to a team and trying to make it happen and being the pioneer, basically going in there and hoping to have everybody build around them. It's a beautiful thing. I love it from a sports fan aspect, and especially when when a team like the Columbus Blue Jackets, they don't have the super rich history. They're a recent kind of quote unquote expansion team, from not 100 years ago. So I think it's a great move for them. So let's double back to Calgary a little bit here. So now they have the Matthew Tkachuk situation where they offered him basically the money that Johnny Gaudreau left on the table, and they end up getting to a point where now they're looking to get traded because he's refused to re-sign anything in Calgary, and he's also a big name himself. And where do you see this going, and what is your take on this particular situation?
Well, that pretty much whatever the trade happens to be, I'm going to assume it's going to be draft picks and prospects, maybe one somewhat established player, but on the younger side, because I think Calgary is now in unfortunately for them, going into rebuild mode. This window shouldn't have closed like it did, because they did have the supporting squad around these two to compete for the Stanley Cup, and now I don't think they do. So, as to where he's going to go, I don't know. I mean, immediately I would start thinking, okay, well, how does he fit on the Rangers? Now, salary-wise, he's only making 1.5 cap hit, so salary-wise, sure, we could take him, but we don't really have any room for him on the left wing. It's the right wing we need the help with, so I don't see him going to the Rangers, unfortunately. And beyond that, I don't know. This is going to be an interesting trade situation because you got a guy not making much money But he's going to get the kind of returns in this trade for a guy making, $7, $8, $9 million a year. So I can't really think offhand who is in desperate need of a left winger that you know and he's young enough too, to the point where this is the kind of guy that you could build around your team. So he may not go to a contender. I'm assuming with that small contract, I didn't look it up, but I'm assuming he does not have a no trade clause. I think it's an entry level contract, so it's pretty much Calgary's GM's ball is in his court to come up with the best possible deal, no matter what the team. And again, it doesn't have to be a team with a lot of salary cap space, but it is good. Well, if they want to resign him, yes. But so actually, I probably see him going to not much of a contender, because a team that does want to pull the trigger on that is going to have hope for something enticing. You could put him in the rental category because he's not making much money. Picks and prospects, but I see him going to more of a low-level team who's got more to give up and more to build around him. That's just my opinion. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of contenders looking to pull the trigger on him with a surplus of draft picks, in now mode. So you know what? Let me backtrack on that. Either or, could be either or, a contender or not contender. I just see the Rangers being one.
Yeah, well, basically, if you don't have enough money to re-sign him long term, you're just trading for a rental. So how much do you actually give up for a rental would be the question for a lot of contending teams. But everybody could use a Matthew Tkachuk. He's somebody who is in the mold of a Brian Marchand and Nazem Kadri, where he's able to be an antagonizer. He's able to get under the skin of different teams, be physical, fight as well, but also can put up big numbers. He could score a lot of goals, point per game player. So every team in the NHL could use a Matthew Tkachuk. So there's definitely not a shortage of suitors at that point. But the NHL, the biggest challenge when you look at the free agency market and you see everybody else who's available, and especially next year, the doors are actually wide open on like the amount of star-studded talent that's going to be there available at this time next year. But when you look at the teams and the numbers and how much salary cap they actually have, there's 75% of teams that have no cap space, and then you have 25% of teams that actually have cap space, but they're not in the super contention. They're a lot of years away from being contenders, so they're not exactly attractive to a lot of the big ticket free agents. So that's the biggest catch-22 when you look at these deals. That's why Nazem Kadri is actually still on the market right now, because he's an unrestricted free agent coming off of the Stanley Cup winning Colorado Avalanche team, and he wants to go to a contender, but contenders don't have the amount of money to give him $8 million, $9 million a year. So that's why he's sitting and waiting and seeing what's going on there. It's a very tough situation for a lot of teams, because then and then we double back to the Matthew Tkachuk situation. If somebody's going to trade for him and they don't have enough money to sign him long term, then they're most likely not going to trade for him, especially at this point right now. This is a situation that, unfortunately, if it does not get resolved, it can go down to the season, and then this would be a perfect rental player. This will be a perfect, mid-season acquisition for a contending team to get just who would do anything just to be a Stanley Cup contender. So if it drags out that long, that would be a tough situation. But it would be probably Calgary's most it would be the way they were able to get the most return for their value for a player like Matthew Tkachuk, and they absolutely struck out on any value that they could have gotten for Johnny Gaudreau, and then now they can replenish some of that and build toward the future with in Matthew Tkachuk. But very, very tough situation for Calgary Flames and their fans. Kind of just feel for them at this point, because we're actually going to get to another team here that's having a really tough time too. But Calgary hasn't won since Stanley Cup since 1990. They haven't really been in the mix as far as like the elite teams, and they finally build this winner that's really, really good, and then the wheels just fall off in one off season. So awful situation going on over there. So, well, let's talk about the Chicago Blackhawks, and they've had a really interesting summer as well. I'd say maybe I don't it's kind of tough to see the maybe in the whole body of work from the summer because we still have the Patrick Kane and Jonathan Tays situations to see how what's the resolve of that outcome. But they end up trading Alex DeBrincat, and then they end up not re-signing Dominic Kubalink, and they have just lost like a ton of talent. And what do you see for them? What they ended up doing and how they're looking for the future?
Nobody really knows because, like, we knew that they were going into a semi-rebuild mode, but DeBrincat we thought was the guy to build around. He's what 24, I think. Got
Yeah.
all sorts of talent. He would be the Patrick Kane to passing the torch to him. Maybe they could have gotten one more glory year with the two of them there, but then it should have been DeBrincat's team. So you got a team that you knew it started last year when they traded Marc-Andre Fleury, and both Jonathan Tays and Patrick Kane made very public comments saying, I don't know what is going on here or what the future holds, which right there says we want out. So they wanted out at last year's trading deadline. And on top of that, you trade the guy, the Brinkett trade makes no sense whatsoever because there's a guy that you hope a number one draft pick turns into. So why would you trade the guy at age 24? So what are you building around? So they got rid of him. They're just unloaded. They are having a going out of business sale, which means Jonathan Tays and Patrick Kane are 100% on the block. We know this. The GM had to come out and say, yeah, let's see how the season plays out. And, he's going to try and move him, close to the deadline for a team that's a contender, that is desperate for somebody like Patrick Kane, so they can try and get max returns. Makes sense. Fine. In the meantime, you're going to have Patrick. Well, and that's actually kind of smart because you trade Kane and or Tays now, you've got 1,000 people there on opening night. So it actually makes sense, and it also gives Patrick Kane, two of them, a reason to actually put some effort in and actually play because they're basically putting, they're putting the resume together in the first couple of months of the season. But not that either of them needs to, shore up their resume, but they're basically putting the finishing touches on that trade and a team that's desperate. And then that is where the New York Rangers come in, I believe, because we are hurting at the right wing. And assuming we can strike some kind of deal that will retain salary, some kind of that, some part of Kane's salary, to make him affordable, I would be 100% all in favor of. And don't misinterpret this because I don't put Capo Caco in the bust category. Not at all. It's 21. Had a very good playoffs. Looks like he's starting to get more comfortable there. Now that the Rangers actually have a legit first two lines with a legit second line center, I could see him possibly making, the second line and seeing what he can do. That being said, he is not at the level of Lafreniere. Lafreniere has arrived. We know what we're going to get out of him. He's going to live up to the hype. Hedl has finally arrived as a center, as a third-line center, which we desperately need. Kako hasn't really shown that same development, so I don't want him traded. I don't want him off the team, but I'm open for that trade. And if come January, February, the Rangers are where they were last year, which is last year, before the deadline, they were a above-average playoff team. Those trading deadlines pretty much put them over the top of the contender. It just fell short. So this year, I'd like it to be a little better than that in the trading deadline. And if it's like we're zeroing in for a Stanley Cup run, I would not be opposed to Capo Caco as well as some of the. We've got a ton of prospects. We got. In fact, we have too many. We have too many prospects, so they are going to have to make some kind of trade. So I would not be opposed in the least for a trade close to the deadline. At the deadline, that includes Patrick Kane shoring up that right wing. I'm fine with Kako. I think we could assume that Lafreniere is off the table. I have heard Heedle's name thrown around, but he's a center, and we do need that. Um, I'd get over it if he got traded for Patrick Kane. Because obviously looking for a Stanley Cup in the next 2 years with Kane. I mean, Kane's he's 33. Yes, he's on the other side of 30 that we don't like, but he just had 92 points. So he's still one of the best players in the league, and he will be next year at 34. I'm not worried about that. So maybe Paco. I'm hearing Zach Jones. We only saw him for a few games last year, but I liked what I saw. He should be. We got two guys there, him and Lundqvist, looking to make the team. One of them will probably be in that conversation. We got tons of other prospects, maybe Ottman, although I'm liking the numbers he's putting up in the juniors as well. But we've got a ton of prospects, and that is obviously what Chicago is looking for. So I think, assuming we could work some kind of salary agreement with salary retention agreement with Chicago, I think the Rangers are very much alive in the Patrick Kane talks, and it's pretty much 100% guaranteed that both him and Hayes will not be finishing the season in Blackhawk uniform. That team is just.
Yeah, I gotta say, I'm gonna actually look at all three local teams at this point, and between if the New York Islanders or the New Jersey Devils can make some kind of surprise run and they're actually looking really good into the season, you could actually see them being able to acquire one of these players, especially the New Jersey Devils. They're one of the few teams that actually have a good amount of cap space. They could take on the whole Patrick Kane or Jonathan Toews contracts, or maybe even work out a deal where they can get both of them and just make some super big deal. Because the New Jersey Devils, what they have on their side is they have a bunch of young prospects. They've had, as we spoke about on this show several times, they've had a really, really good luck of the draft lottery and having very, very high draft picks. And it all depends on how they pan out, which is something that nobody could really foresee. And if they end up really booming, and you have a Nico Hischier who has a full season and can continue his point per game average there, and then you have Jack Hughes if he ends up taking that next step and becoming a elite player, and he ends up staying healthy. They have a lot of questionable talent, but they also have a lot of upside in their talent. So if they end up becoming players and actually having money, oh boy, I mean they could really make some deals over there. They could even acquire a Matthew Tkachuk as well. Then the New York Islanders, they're right now kind of like in a perplexed mode where you don't really know. But then you also, the way their team was built before, you didn't really expect them to really do much, and then they ended up having 2 straight Eastern Conference Finals appearances. So you don't really know what's going to happen there. But there's always surprise teams that end up emerging throughout the season, and those teams can end up making it happen. And then it's also what we talked about the New York Mets last year, where it was tough for them to get free agents, so they ended up having to trade for players to come. They ended up having to trade for impact players to come into the team so that they'd be able to contend more, and you kind of just like capturing them instead of having to have them come as free agents. So that there's also that possibility as well, especially for the New Jersey Devils. Now, as it comes to the New York Rangers, definitely there'll be players. They have the prospects. They have I don't think they have too much great draft capital at this point, but they do have the prospects, and they already have that working for them. They have not very much cap space now, but then as the season goes on for all NHL teams, depending on what moves they make during the season and how many times they have to call up different players throughout the season, they actually accrue cap space. So that's what the Rangers had last year. They accrued so much cap space that they were able to get Andrew Kopp and Vetrano kind of just for prospects and not having to trade money for money. So the very, very fluid situation going on between these three teams. And you always talk about the how big a surprise the New Jersey Devils could be at one point.
Yes.
This would be a great time to be doing that, especially when you lose out on a Johnny Gaudreau. If you end up surprising some teams and you end up being competitive in that super, super tough Metro division, then you're attractive, and then you can get stars that want to come play for you.
Yeah, the Devils all of a sudden find themselves with 10.2 million extra dollars to spend that they didn't think they were going to have.
Yeah.
Which of course does put them in the Patrick Kane talks. But Patrick Kane, unlike Chuck, does have a no move clause, which means he's going to have to pick, approve the team that he goes to. So does a 33-year-old superstar like that want to go to the Islanders or the Devils? Very possible. And like you said, it depends on the season they're going to have. The Devils, we don't know what we're going to get out of either of those teams, really, because the Devils have been building towards something. The Devils and Rangers kind of were building it at the same time. Rangers are there. Devils are almost there. We don't know if this goalie, on paper, it's an improvement. I mean, anybody's an improvement over the Mackenzie Blackwood-led carousel they had going on last year. So this guy's definitely an improvement. The question is how much of an improvement, we don't know. He could, be the best goalie in the league next year. We don't know. But it could be, Blackwood 2.0. So the question is, the rest of that team is looking decent. The Andre Palat pickup gives them some grit. Overpaid a little bit, but they've got a lot of money to spend, it seems. So if they have a good season, maybe Kane waves the, says, all right, I'll go to them. If they don't, I could see the contender status being pretty important in his mind at age 33, because he does have another year left on his contract. So he'll be wherever he gets traded. He's not a rental per se. He'll be there for the second half or last third of this coming season, as well as the next year. So he's got to think about that. So again, we don't know what these guys are thinking, but my honest opinion, I see him contender status, or if not this year, next year, being integral to that. And that could be the Devils. It should be the Devils. Maybe not this year. I see them as the Devils as competing for one of the wild cards this year, but I don't see them as a legit contender. But again, if they're closing on a wild card, you had a guy like Patrick Kane, who knows, or because they can obviously afford both of them. So who knows? The Islanders, they're a big question mark. Back-to-back conference finals. I gave them kind of a pass in that this past season being kind of an anomaly for them, because their season should have been shut down a while before it was, with all the COVID people they had. I don't think they had 7 at one point. They had injuries. They started playing again. They never, when everybody got healthy, they got a little better, but they still weren't great. So they get kind of a pass. But that being said, they made no moves. The only team in the league that made no acquisitions of free agents. So if you have a non-playoff team that had the same core that, is on back-to-back conference finals, you have to make some moves if you don't make the playoffs, and they didn't. So,
and then they booted Barry Trotz, so you don't even know what their team's gonna look like. You don't know what are they gonna follow the same philosophy that they had, or are they gonna try to change it up? So there's a lot of question marks when it goes to the New York Islanders for sure.
Yeah, and firing Trotz. So there's obviously a lot of disarray going on in that Islander nation right now, which again is hilarious for us. But just as an objective, sports fan, you don't know what's going on there. They may hit the ice running and be back in conference final form. I just don't see it happening. But you never know. You never know. How a team's on paper. Versus how it is in reality, you never know until you start playing this game. So
yeah, definitely be interesting to see how the season unfolds for all the local teams. So let's go outside and let's actually talk about some winners here. Some teams that really took a step forward, and some teams that have been down for a while, and now they're kind of looking like they're on the upswing. So we have the Detroit Red Wings, who made a flurry of moves. They ended up signing David Perron, Dominic Kubalik, who we mentioned earlier in the show, Andrew Kopp, who we also mentioned earlier in the show, Ben Chariot, and traded for Valley Hasu, goaltender for St. Louis. So they looks like they're onto something here. Look like a lot of times, maybe a couple years back, when they ended up having their 25 years consecutively in the playoffs snapped, And like all the talk was that they didn't have enough draft picks, they didn't have a great farm system. It looked like they were going to be down for a little while, but now they ended up making some really great draft picks with Lucas Raymond and um, Shirts, the Calder winning Calder Trophy winning the defenseman. They end up making, they ended up hitting absolute homers with those two picks. And then now they ended up adding some depth guys. So it looks like some character guys, some guys that, some, I'd say maybe some gel guys. You don't really, it wasn't like a big splash superstar for $10 million. But when you look at the amount of returns that they ended up getting with actually having cap space as well, I think they did a really, really great job this summer, and they're probably not done yet.
Yeah, but yeah, Detroit definitely, Ottawa, both definitely won the off season so far to this point. You got two teams there that have been well, the Ottawa's been doormats for quite some time. Detroit only been a few years. We're not used to seeing that. This is a team that made the playoffs, 22, 23 seasons in a row, something. I think they set a record, something ridiculous like that. And then obviously the ride was going to come to an end eventually. But it's a team that's just not used to being down there, and they made it very, very clear that they didn't want to stay down there. So, and Ottawa definitely the hands down winner. Ottawa, we saw the Ottawa team. Toward the end of the season they got better, and you could tell that they were not the same team toward the end they were at the beginning of the season, and they just made a gigantic splash in the offseason. With Giroux signing, the DeBrincat trade, a couple other moves. Ottawa is looking, they're looking to be a contender now. That's a pretty brief rebuild, or at least a rebuild that looked like it wasn't going anywhere for a while, and then all of a sudden they put it into overdrive. So Ottawa and Detroit, it's going to make the East very, very interesting because now all of a sudden you got two teams that didn't make the playoffs that are major league contenders now. What is that going to do for a Devils team trying to get back in there? What is that going to do for a Capitals and Penguins teams that were not as strong as the Capitals and Penguins team? Yeah, they made the playoffs, but they weren't as strong as they were the Capitals and Penguins championship teams that we know. That we've come to know. So all of a sudden they got competition there. Columbus, all of a sudden move becomes possible competing for one of those wild cards. And maybe the Bruins drop out of that. Maybe Toronto drops out of that. Maybe they just got tired of having great regular seasons and bounced in the first round, and they said maybe they're just going to say to hell with it. Let's just not make the playoffs. What's the point? Oh, you never know. Yeah. So point is, Detroit and Ottawa made, and Columbus, but mostly Ottawa followed by Detroit in that order, made the East very, very interesting next year. And kudos to both GMs there for deciding that they really want to put the thing in overdrive and become possible playoff teams next year, not 2-3 years down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to mention Ottawa Senators next, so it's funny that you mentioned that. We could totally segue into that. But why I put Detroit number one on this is because I think they did the most work acquiring talent, and also you didn't really see it coming because you didn't really see the core there. I think when you look at the Ottawa Senators, I actually wrote an article a couple of years back where the Ottawa Senators, where they're definitely – going to be an elite team and a Stanley Cup winning Stanley Cup contender within a brief 4-year period, and we're basically in year 2 of that, and they have just absolutely leaped over any foreseeable expectations from that point because they had the high draft picks, they had what the New Jersey Devils have also been able to have, and then when they ended up trading Erik Karlsson, that ended up turning into the number 4 pick. On top of, I think they already had the 5th pick at that point too. So yeah, they had back-to-back picks there, and you could see that if they hit homers on these draft picks, that they were going to be able to really do some damage moving forward. And then they end up getting this offseason, they end up getting the hometown guy and Claude Giroux, who brings in the leadership and the experienced veterans. So he's a home run hitter, and then you also have Alex DeBrincat, who just absolutely shocked everything. They ended up trading a package which included the number seven overall pick in this year's draft. But at this point, you've already made great selections leading up to this season. So you give up a number seven pick for an impact player right now in Alex DeBrincat, and they like just completely changes the complexion of the team and where it's going. And they could definitely, and they ended up acquiring Cam Talbot too, who comes in with a chip on his shoulder with Marc Andre Fleury just completely booting him off of the Minnesota Wild. So you have this situation here. He could have something to prove here, especially with his career that's mostly been maybe up and down when it going into Ottawa and all the other stops that he's had in his career. He was actually really doing really really well in Minnesota before But then how do you not trade for a Vezina Trophy winner and perennial candidate over there? So it was a tough situation for Cam Talbot to deal with, but he ends up being on Ottawa, and I mean, if you look at the grand scheme of it all, didn't he just hit the jackpot now? Because I mean, you're looking at a team here in an Atlantic Division that could possibly be for the taking here. You know.
Yeah, no, definitely, definitely. Again, I mentioned Toronto. Before. We don't know what we're going to get out of them. Here's a team that every year just rips through the regular season, but when it gets to the playoffs, their goaltending and defense is their Achilles heel. It can't get out of the first round. That might. I see Toronto. I see Toronto making a move. Obviously, Marner and Austin Matthews are not going anywhere. But I don't think Tavares is going anywhere either with those contracts. Who's going to take on those contracts? But
William Nylander has been a name that's
that's
been
the name.
thrown around. I mean, for 3-4 years at this point.
Yeah.
But when you look at when you look at teams like Toronto and basically every other team in the league that does not have cap space, where can you send these guys to shed salary when nobody else has money? And that's what we've seen here with this super tight salary cap. I mean, I think if it was a different world where they had a bigger salary cap, I think a lot of these moves would have already been made. I think William Nylander would have already been shedded from that team, and other different scenarios. But we are where we are right now. Actually, and one little tidbit about the salary cap. We actually this year was the NHL enjoyed their highest view ratings in their history. A lot of it was through TNT, and some through ESPN, but a lot of it came from more of from the TNT standpoint, and that can only build more viewers, and if there's more hockey fans, then that's gonna increase the attendance, increase the revenue, and then they'll end up moving forward. But before the pandemic hit, we mentioned on this show a few months ago where uh, they they were due for a $7 million bump in the salary cap, which would have easily been the most ever before in the at the end of the 2020 season. But unfortunately, the pandemic happened, and it ended up wiping out all that revenue from the rest of the regular season and the playoffs. And so now the NHL is slowly building up, trending up, and I think throughout all of the four major sports, they made the biggest leap from the pandemic, and they are moving up in the right direction. So I think as far as the hard salary cap goes, maybe 3-4 years will end up it'll end up not being as big of an issue as it is right now, but it is definitely a cumbersome situation for a lot of teams, especially a lot of high priced free agents too, because they've done enough to earn the money, and a lot of times they go contract for contract with other players that have similar stats and similar styles, and they end up not being able to get what they afford or what they're worth because everybody else doesn't have money. So it's a very tough situation for everybody going around. Um, so we'll also I want to talk about the Carolina Hurricanes. So they end up losing Vincent Trocheck, and they lost Tony DeAngelo. He ends up getting traded to the Philadelphia Flyers. But then they end up acquiring Max Pacioretty for future considerations. I mean, this is a future Hall of Famer, 40-goal scorer. They ended up acquiring him for essentially nothing. and then they end up getting Brent Burns from the San Jose Sharks. So, what do you think of how? Like, I mean, this is the team that already won the division last year, and they end up improving their roster. What do you think about them and their moves?
Yeah, I was, when the free agency started, I saw I thought they were not imploding, but I think they were losing a lot. D'Angelo, yeah, he's only been there 1 year, but he was their power play quarterback. With their power play pretty much died in the the last third of the season as well as the playoffs. But they had something going all year. He was basically, this was an audition year for him. He had a very good season. Trocheck, the Niederreiter. So I thought it was coming apart for them. But I got to give credit to their GM. He did a great job. They got Pacioretty. What's going on with Vegas is a whole other story. But Pacioretty for basically nothing. The Brent Burns trade I think is pretty good. I think he's past his prime. Actually, I don't put as much stock in the Burns trade because Burns was always more that offensive defenseman. That Mike Green, PK Subban, Eric Carlson, Keith Yandel type of defenseman, which only works, like Shattenkirk when we got Shattenkirk in 2017. Guys like that are your big name defensemen as the quote unquote best defenseman in the league. But guys like that tend to be defensive liabilities, and I wouldn't. The liability is a strong word for Brent Burns, but he's not the strongest defensive. He's more offensive minded. So he's pretty much going to replace D'Angelo, but because D'Angelo is the same way. But I don't see. Their top four defenseman is great. Their third pair is hurting. And this was a team that had a surplus of defense to the point where they traded us. They traded us Adam Fox for a second round pick because they just didn't have room for him. They traded us a top three defenseman in the league, both offense and defense on both sides of the blue line, because they just had that surplus. They got rid of Dougie Hamilton because they just had a surplus. So they don't have a surplus anymore. I think the Pacioretty acquisition, to replace Trocheck was good. I think that, and I forgot who else they picked up. Somebody, somebody they're talking about that was a gritty. Who was Lane Peterson? Okay, so that's So that adds some physicality because they are going to lose some physicality as well with D'Angelo and some of that grit. But this is a team that needs offense. They had the lowest goals against in the league all year long, and they were exposed in the playoffs. The Rangers exposed them because when you have a team, yes, the old adage, defensive goaltending wins championships, which of course does, but or actually in hockey, it's goaltending and special teams that wins it. But they were always they relied heavily on their defense, which you obviously have to have, as we saw your Panthers, your Toronto Maple Leafs team, your Capitals in straight seasons that were all offense and then just got exposed in the playoffs. They're kind of the exact opposite in their lack of being able to score goals, especially when you run into a goalie like an Igor Shesterkin. Their lack of being able to score goals kind of hurts them, and they're kind of. I mean, they've got some talent. They do, Sebastian Aho, Teravainen, they definitely got some talent, but, until somebody, they don't have a superstar go-to guy there, and, that we have, or finally Chris Kreider. They're more of a spread it all out evenly, goals by committee kind of team, and I don't think they did much to really, I think they do need a superstar on that team. Again, they've got a well-balanced, good attack, but they're just not scoring enough goals. We saw it with the Rangers, throughout basically the entire Henrik Lundqvist era, as to why he retired without a Stanley Cup. And I think that the Canes did a good job of somewhat maintaining, but it was clear that, this is a team that's been knocking on the door for like 4 seasons now, and I don't think they put themselves over the top. I think they got a little weaker on defense, and if defense is going to be, your bread and butter, they got a little weaker. And I think they shored up the offense a little bit, but I don't think they did enough. This is a team that likes to not give up goals, but also doesn't like to score them. And I don't think they did enough to shore up the offense. Because if they're going to run into a scorching hot goalie come playoff time, it's 3 or 4 straight years now. It's been their Achilles heel. So I don't necessarily think they put themselves over the top. They did enough to replace what they lost, but they didn't really get any better. I don't think that's just my
I'll disagree on the standpoint that I think that I think the Carolina Hurricanes, they've proven throughout the years that defense is their system. That is their bread and butter. That is their go-to strength on the team. And I think it's one of those like Bill Belichick kind of situations where it's just interchangeable. And I think that when you put a Brett Burns instead of a Tony DeAngelo, I think this is a part where Brent Burns doesn't have to be, like a stalwart defenseman. He could do his offensive thing and create offense while he has a stalwart with him back to back. That's maybe that's possibly when you look at the Eric Carlson and Brent Burns combination, that when you have two offensive guys, it doesn't really work from the defensive standpoint because then you're just leaving your goalie hanging and they're gonna end up getting lit up at some point. So this is a defensive system where they can smother a Brent Burns from his defensive responsibilities, but then also add more offense. And then you have I wouldn't say Max Pacioretty is a complete change replacement for Vincent Trocheck, but because you have a center and a wing, but you also have Martin Nikas that was on the third line that he can theoretically with age and he has the potential to move up to the second line, and I just think that I think they did a great job with what they had and what they had to lose, because then you look at a Vincent Trocheck, you can't really you're leading the team the division, so you can't really trade somebody like that at the trade deadline. So you end up losing him for nothing, but then you end up because you put yourself in a great position, you have cap space and such. They ended up acquiring these former superstars, and I think they're able. I think it'll complement them well. And then I don't know, it's very tough to see for them to be division winners again, especially with the Rangers improving and other such teams behind them. It's a super strong division. Actually, let's not. I actually have to give some credit to the Pittsburgh Penguins, who didn't really do anything earth-shattering as far as like acquiring talent, but they ended up keeping their Hall of Famers. They ended up keeping Evgeny Malkin. They ended up keeping Chris Letang, and then they ended up keeping Ricardo Raquel, who was a deadline acquisition from the year before. They just re-signed Kapanen earlier today. So they do. I think the Pittsburgh Penguins are definitely not going to go anywhere. They end up having to. If they have if they could shore up the goaltending a little bit there, or have a healthy Tristan Jarry. I mean, they're you can't just count the Pittsburgh Penguins out. So I think I expect a stronger year from them overall next season, and it's a super strong division. So I don't know if the Carolina Hurricanes are going to be able to take that repeat so easily, but I think that definitely. They have the nucleus, and they have a team system that a lot of other teams don't have right now. So when you face them, it's a defensive mismatch, and it's just it creates all type of matchup problems. And I think that's one of the main reasons why they were so much better at home than they were on the road, especially in the playoff season. So I think they're going to do really well for themselves, and their acquisitions were very, very helpful.
Yeah, the Penguins, signing Raquel was huge because as we saw firsthand in the playoffs, the Crosby line wasn't even their strongest line. It was, Raquel, he went out in the first game, but it was that Rust and, their names escape me, but those guys, that line was the line that really terrorized the Rangers.
Yeah. Jake Gensel.
Gensel, that's the one. That son of a... Anyway, they did that. That's why, because that right there is credit to them because they were the best line for the Penguins. Sidney Crosby is, of course, Sidney Crosby. I think Malkin is definitely not the player he was. Same with Letang, and this is coming from my Pittsburgh friends that will be the first to admit that. So they are aging. So they do need to put more talent. That Sidney Crosby can definitely hoist the Stanley Cup again. Him, Malkin, and Letang can definitely hoist
Sidney
the Stanley Cup.
Crosby's just a man. I mean, let's face it.
Yeah, no, he really is. We hate him. I hate the guy. I can't stand him. But I mean, he's going to go down as one of the top 5 players in NHL history. You can't even debate that.
Absolutely.
So they just need to put more around them, and that's why that Raquel saw re-signing him, that trade and re-signing him was a huge deal for them. And I think they maintain. And look, they had 103 points last year. They weren't really on the same level. In conversation, in reality, they were, but in conversation, they weren't really on the same level as everyone else because they didn't win the division. They came in 3rd in the division, but all 4 teams, in fact, all 8 teams in the East had 100 points. So I don't care who you are. You get 100 points in an NHL season, you are a Stanley Cup contender. Period. I mean, 100 points is 100 points. I don't think it's ever happened before with all 8 in the conference. So you had all 8 teams. They had 103. Even the Capitals had a wild card. A 100-point wild card. So the East Conference was completely up for grabs last year. But the Penguins, not to go off track here, the Penguins will definitely be back in the division competing conversation next year. They were right up there in first place, and then kind of trailed off, in the second half of the season, and then they put them back on track. So the Penguins, their reign of terror is not yet over. Same with Tampa.
They did the most. They did the most of keeping their own guys as anybody else in this offseason.
Exactly. So these teams aren't going anywhere, and you've got 3 more teams, about 4 more teams entering the conversation next year. And Detroit, Ottawa, the Devils, Columbus. And again, the Islanders are a big question mark. What are we going to get next year? Are we going to get last year's Islanders team, or are we going to get the back-to-back conference finals Islanders team? They may very well be around. They might not. We don't know. But you've got more teams entering the conversation than dropping out of the conversation in the East.
Absolutely. Definitely. The overall sentiment is that the East got super stronger and the West got weaker.